The lie was a masterpiece of deception, as exquisitely crafted as the vintage Cartier brooch pinned to her lapel. From my station across the hushed, wood-panelled dining room of the Ethelred, I watched her, Serafina Croft, perform. She would touch the arm of the man beside her, her fingers light as a butterfly's wing, her laugh a carefully modulated chime of pure delight. That man was Alistair Finch, a name spoken in the boardrooms of Boston with the same quiet reverence one might reserve for a founding father. But I knew her artifice. I had seen the preliminary sketch of her fraud on the unlocked screen of her phone. In that heartbeat, I was faced with a choice that could vaporize my precarious existence, remain the invisible waitress and keep the job that paid my grandfather's nursing home bills, or inform a titan of industry that his carefully constructed world was about to be plundered by a con artist and risk absolute ruin. I chose. And the next morning, my world wasn't merely altered, it was reforged in solid platinum. The air inside the Ethelred, a bastion of old Boston money tucked away on a quiet Beacon Hill street, was thick with the scent of beeswax, old leather, and quiet power. For Clara Mayhew, a 22-year-old history major at Boston University, it was a foreign country she was only permitted to enter with a work uniform as her passport. Her real life, a cramped studio in Alston, with peeling paint and the constant worry over her grandfather's mounting medical expenses, smelled of brewing coffee and quiet desperation. Her grandfather, a kind, gentle man who had raised her, had been the victim of a cruel financial scam years ago, a wound that had stolen his savings and his spirit, and had ignited in Clara a cold, deep-seated hatred for grifters. Each shift was an 8-hour masterclass in self-effacement. She was a ghost in a starched white apron, a silent spectre who anticipated the need for more water, cleared plates with soundless efficiency, and memorized the preferences of the regulars. Clara was exceptional at it. Her academic focus was on historical document analysis. She spent her days studying the watermarks of 18th-century letters and the telltale signs of forged signatures. This discipline had trained her eyes to see what others missed. The subtle tremor in a hand reaching for a wine glass, the fleeting micro-expression that betrayed a lie, the almost imperceptible detail that was out of place. She could spot a counterfeit Rolex at 10 paces. Tonight, her section included the coveted Table 12, a discreet alcove booth, and in that booth sat Alistair Finch. Even without knowing his name, you knew he was a man of consequence. He wasn't ostentatious like the new money tech entrepreneurs who sometimes blustered through the doors. Finch, in his late 50s, had a gravitational presence, with thick, steel-grey hair and intelligent eyes that held a hint of profound weariness. He wore a simple, perfectly tailored tweed jacket, as if it were a second skin. He was the architect of his own empire, Finch Automation, a global leader in robotics and logistics. He was the kind of man who didn't just own the company. He had built it from a garage with his own 2 hands. And on his arm, or more accurately, clinging to his arm, was Serafina Croft. Serafina was, by any measure, a vision. She was perhaps 20 years his junior, with raven black hair styled in a severe, elegant bob, and a sleek crimson dress that likely cost more than Clara's entire student loan debt. Her conversation was a dazzling tapestry of art, literature, and philanthropic causes, each topic presented with an air of breathless passion. She was a flawless performance of the cultured, adoring younger partner. Clara had served them 4 times before. The first time, she had been charmed. They seemed a perfect, if slightly cliché, May-December romance. The second time, she noticed the seams in the performance. Serafina had been discussing a recent acquisition at the Museum of Fine Arts, but she misattributed a quote from John Singer Sargent to Whistler, a minor slip, but jarring to a student who had just written a paper on the very subject. The third time, Clara observed how Seraphina's eyes, when Alistair was studying the menu, would do a cold, quick sweep of the room. Not with curiosity, but with a hunter's appraisal. Tonight was the fifth time, and the masterpiece was beginning to show its cracks. The evening began with its usual script. Clara approached the table, her voice a low, professional murmur. "Good evening, Mr. Finch, Miss Croft. May I get you started with something from the bar?" "The usual for me, Clara. Thank you," Alistair said, offering a small, tired smile. He remembered her name. It was a small thing, but it made what she was contemplating infinitely harder. He wasn't just a mark, he was a person, a gentleman. "Of course, sir. A Sazerac. And for you, Miss Croft?" "A glass of the Bollinger, darling," she purred, placing her hand over his on the table. "Let's celebrate." "Celebrate what, my dear?" he asked, his features softening as he looked at her. "The foundation, of course," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The final charter documents are with the lawyers. The Eleanor Finch Foundation will soon be a reality." Clara felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She knew of the foundation. It was public knowledge that Alistair Finch was creating a major philanthropic organization in memory of his late wife, Eleanor, who had passed away 5 years prior. It was to be his legacy. "To Eleanor," Alistair said, his voice thick with emotion, raising his water glass. "To Eleanor," Seraphina echoed, though her eyes held a triumphant gleam that had nothing to do with remembrance. Clara retreated to the bar, the ghost of her grandfather's hollowed-out eyes, after he was swindled, floating in her memory. He had trusted a nice young man who promised to double his retirement savings. He had fallen for a well-rehearsed performance of sincerity. She was watching the same tragedy unfold, only this version involved hundreds of millions of dollars and a predator of exceptional skill. She delivered the drinks, her hands a miracle of steadiness. As she placed the champagne flute down, Seraphina's phone, a sleek, new device, chimed on the table beside her plate. It lay screen up. Seraphina glanced at it, a flicker of irritation crossing her face, before it was replaced by a look of saccharine concern directed at Alistair. "It's just my cousin, Julian," she sighed, a theatrical roll of her eyes. "He's helping with the initial donor outreach for the foundation. So dedicated, but honestly, a little needy." Alistair chuckled, a rich, warm sound. "He's passionate. We should have him join us for dinner next week." "What a wonderful idea, darling," she said. But her attention was already back on the phone. As Alistair turned to look at a painting on the far wall, a portrait he was considering acquiring for the foundation, Seraphina snatched up her phone. Believing herself shielded by the angle and Clara's professional distance, she quickly typed a reply. But Clara wasn't at a professional distance. She was quietly refilling Alistair's water glass, her movements economical and silent, and her eyes, trained to catch the minute details of forgery, caught it all. The screen was angled perfectly in her direction for a split second. The message thread she was replying to was not from Julian. It was from a contact named M, and the message on the screen, just before her thumb obscured it, was brutally clear. M. Has he signed the final charter docs? The offshore accounts are primed for the initial endowment transfer. Once it's moved, the Finch legacy is ours. Seraphina's reply, almost. He's sentimental tonight. Another toast to dear Eleanor, and we should be set. This is easier than Geneva. Clara felt the air rush from her lungs. It was a physical shock. Geneva, the initial endowment. The Finch legacy is ours. This wasn't just a gold digger securing her future. This was a systematic, predatory takeover of a man's tribute to his dead wife. It was a heist of a scale she could barely comprehend, aimed not just at his wallet, but at his very soul. The words echoed in the screaming silence of her mind. She looked at Alistair Finch, at the genuine grief and love in his eyes as he spoke of his late wife, and a wave of protective fury, cold and sharp, washed over her. He wasn't a fool. He was a man blinded by loneliness and a desperate desire to believe in something good again. His trust was not just being betrayed, it was being meticulously weaponized against him. Her training, her every instinct for self-preservation, shrieked at her. Look away. Say nothing. This is not your battle. You need this job. Gramps needs his care. The payment for the nursing home was due in 10 days. Getting fired wasn't an inconvenience. It was a potential catastrophe that would put her grandfather's well-being at risk. Her manager, Mr. Dubois, was a martinet who viewed any disruption to the restaurant's serene atmosphere as a capital offense. But then she remembered her grandfather's shame. I should have known, Clara, he had whispered to her, his hand trembling in hers. The paperwork looked so real. He too had been a victim of a masterpiece of deception. She had been a helpless teenager then, able to offer only comfort. She wasn't helpless now. Serafina finished her text, a flicker of a triumphant smirk on her lips, before she reassembled her mask of loving devotion and placed the phone face down. The dinner proceeded, a parade of exquisitely prepared courses. Clara moved like a phantom, her mind a raging storm. Every time Serafina touched Alistair's hand, every time she offered a supportive murmur about the foundation, Clara felt a fresh surge of revulsion. She watched Alistair, completely ensnared, discuss his plans, a scholarship wing for underprivileged artists, a research grant for art conservation, all in Eleanor's name. He was building a monument to his love, and the woman beside him was planning to loot it and leave him with the rubble. The choice wasn't a choice anymore. It was an imperative. As she cleared their dessert plates, her decision settled into her bones with terrifying certainty. Alistair was examining the bill. Serafina had excused herself to the powder room, likely to make a call to M and confirm their victory. It was now or never. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. Her palms were damp. She took a deep, steadying breath, walked to the table and stood beside Alistair Finch. Mr. Finch, she began, her voice a near whisper. He looked up, his eyes questioning but not unkind. Yes, Clara. Everything was excellent, thank you. I'm glad, sir, she said, her throat constricting. Sir, I'm about to commit an act of profound unprofessionalism. You would be entirely justified in having me dismissed for what I'm about to say. His brow furrowed slightly. He placed his pen down on the leather billfold, granting her his full, undivided attention. The sheer intensity of his focus was like a physical force. Continue. Clara swallowed, her eyes darting toward the distant powder room. Sir, I am a history student. My specialty is in authentication and forgery. I spend my days learning how to tell the real from the fake. She was rambling, trying to build a foundation for the bomb she was about to detonate. She had to be direct. When Miss Croft was texting her cousin Julian earlier, she said, placing a deliberate, slight emphasis on the name. Her phone was angled towards me. I saw the screen. I was not trying to pry, sir, I assure you, but it was unavoidable from my position. Alistair's expression remained neutral, but a profound stillness settled over him. The ambient clatter of the restaurant seemed to fade away. The messages I saw, they were not about donor outreach. Clara said, her voice trembling but gaining strength. They mentioned offshore accounts, an endowment transfer, and the city of Geneva. Sir, I believe the Eleanor Finch Foundation is being stolen from you before it even begins. I believe you are the target of an extremely sophisticated deception. She had said it. The words hung between them, immutable and terrifying. Alistair Finch stared at her for a long, silent moment. His face was an unreadable granite mask. Clara couldn't discern anger, shock, or dismissal. A cold dread began to pool in her stomach. She hadn't just lit a match. She had thrown it into an armory. He didn't speak. He simply picked up his pen, made a decisive stroke on the signature line, and pushed the billfold back toward the center of the table. And then, the light chime of an approaching laugh heralded Seraphina's return. She glided to the table, her smile firmly in place, but her eyes narrowed as she saw Clara standing so close to Alistair. "Is everything all right, my love?" she asked, her voice a silken weapon, as she placed a proprietary hand on his shoulder. Alistair looked from Clara's pale, resolute face to Seraphina's exquisitely beautiful one. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Clara felt like a defendant, awaiting the jury's verdict. "Clara was just ensuring our experience was satisfactory," Alistair finally said, his voice unnervingly devoid of emotion. He folded the customer copy of the receipt and tucked it into his jacket. He did not look at Clara again. A war of relief and terror raged inside her. He hadn't called for the manager, but he also hadn't acknowledged her warning. He had simply shut down. Seraphina, however, was a predator who had sensed a disturbance in the currents. "Oh," she said, her eyes, now cold as ice chips, locking onto Clara. "And what exactly did you feel the need to discuss with him, Waitress?" The word was a dart, meant to wound and remind Clara of her station. "I was just confirming that the service was acceptable, Miss Croft," Clara said, her throat dry. "Is that so?" Seraphina's smile was a predatory baring of teeth. She leaned in toward Alistair, her voice a stage whisper, loud enough for Clara to hear. "She seems a bit forward, don't you think? Probably hoping for a larger tip from the billionaire." The accusation was designed to humiliate, to reduce Clara's act of desperate integrity to a grubby shakedown. It landed with a sharp sting. Before Clara could form a reply, a new voice sliced through the tension. "Is there a problem here, Mr. Finch?" It was Mr. Dubois, the manager, appearing with his unerring instinct for trouble. His face was a mask of professional solicitude, but his eyes, flicking between a mere waitress and his most valuable client, held a glint of pure panic. Seraphina seized the moment, turning the full force of her theatrical outrage upon him. "Yes, Mr. Dubois, there is a significant problem. This employee," she gestured dismissively at Clara, "has been wildly inappropriate. She was intruding on our private dinner, telling my fiancé the most bizarre and malicious lies." Fiancé. The word struck Clara with the force of a physical blow. The engagement must have been the reason for their celebration. The final piece of the con was locking into place. Dubois' face went white. He turned to Clara, his expression hardening into fury. "Clara, what is she talking about?" Clara started. But what could she say? She looked to Alistair, a silent, desperate plea for him to intervene, to give some sign that he had heard her. He remained silent, his face a stone cliff. He simply rose from his seat and held Seraphina's chair for her. It was an act of dismissal. He had chosen his side, and it wasn't hers. The cold dread solidified into a leaden certainty. She had gambled everything and lost. "This girl," Seraphina continued, her voice rising with practiced indignation, "had the audacity to accuse me of of the most disgusting things. She insinuated that I am being unfaithful to Alistair, that I am somehow plotting against him. Can you imagine? This little nobody, trying to poison our relationship out of jealousy, or who knows what other pathetic motive. The scene was now drawing quiet, curious glances from adjacent tables. For a restaurant like the Ethelred, this was a 5-alarm social fire. Dubois grabbed Clara's upper arm, his grip surprisingly vice-like. "My office? Now," he hissed, his voice a low, furious growl. He then turned back to the couple, his face a contortion of apologies. "Mr. Finch, Miss Croft, I am mortified. I cannot express how profoundly sorry I am. This is an unforgivable breach of our standards. Your meal is, of course, complimentary. Please accept my deepest apologies for this embarrassing disturbance." Alistair gave a single, curt nod, his eyes still unreadable. He guided a distraught Seraphina, who was now dabbing at perfectly dry eyes with a silk handkerchief, toward the exit. Just before they disappeared through the door, Seraphina looked back over her shoulder. Her expression was one of pure, venomous triumph. The walk to Dubois' cramped office was a gauntlet of shame. The hushed whispers of her fellow staff members followed her like a shroud. She had committed the ultimate sin, and now she was being led to her execution. Dubois slammed the door, and the polished veneer of the professional manager dissolved. His face was mottled with rage. "Are you out of your mind?" He spat, his voice trembling. "Do you have any idea who that was? That was Alistair Finch. His corporate account, his personal patronage, it keeps this restaurant afloat. We host his board meetings, his charity dinners. He is a pillar of this establishment. And you accused his fiancée of being a criminal." "But she is," Clara cried, her voice finally breaking. "I saw the messages. It was a con. They're stealing his foundation. I don't care if she was sacrificing a live chicken on the table," Dubois roared, slamming his fist on his desk. "Your job is to open the wine and close your mouth. You see nothing. You hear nothing. That is the job. You have just alienated our most important client. You have humiliated this entire restaurant, and you have most certainly cost yourself your job." The words, though expected, still felt like a punch to the gut. "Get your things from your locker," Dubois said, his voice now flat and cold. "You are fired, effective immediately. Your final check will be mailed. Now get out of my sight before I have security escort you from the premises." Numbly, Clara made her way to the staff locker room. The usual end-of-shift camaraderie was gone. Her colleagues averted their eyes, finding sudden, urgent tasks to attend to as she approached. She was an outcast. She changed out of her uniform, the symbol of her now extinguished life, and into her worn jeans and a thin sweater. As she stuffed the apron into her tote bag, her fingers brushed against the tip folio from table 12. In his rage, Dubois had shoved it into her hands on the way to his office. With a trembling hand, she opened it. The bill was for $972.50. Alistair Finch had paid the full amount. On the tip line, he had written a single, bold, humiliating 0. But underneath the 0, on the merchant copy he had to have known she would be the one to process, he had written 2 small, almost indecipherable words. "Well played." Clara stared at the words, her mind reeling. What could it possibly mean? Was it a cruel, sarcastic jab? A compliment on her audacity before he sided with his fiancée? Or was it something else entirely? A signal? It didn't matter. She was fired. She was broke. She was facing the terrifying prospect of telling her grandfather she couldn't cover his expenses next month. The elevator ride down from the restaurant felt like a descent. The doors opened into the opulent, indifferent lobby, and Clara walked out into the crisp Boston night. The weight of her choice pressed down on her. a physical ache in her chest. The tears she had held back in front of Dubois now streamed down her face, hot and bitter. She had acted to prevent a man from being conned, just as her grandfather had been. She knew, in the core of her being, that she had done the right thing. But as she stood on the curb, with less than $70 to her name and the spectre of eviction looming, doing the right thing felt indistinguishable from utter defeat. The next morning, the world was a study in grey. A bleak, persistent drizzle slid down the windowpane of her small studio, mirroring the landscape of her future. Sleep had been a stranger, the night a torturous loop of replaying the scene at the restaurant, of seeing Seraphina's triumphant smirk and Alistair's stone face. The 2 words on the receipt, "well played," had become a maddening riddle, a splinter of ambiguity in a wound of certainty. She was scrolling through online job boards, the listings for experienced fine dining server feeling like a cruel joke, when a sharp, authoritative knock sounded at her door. It wasn't the gentle tap of a neighbor or the buzz from the lobby. This was a knock that did not expect to be kept waiting. Wiping the tear tracks from her cheeks, Clara moved to the door, her heart giving a nervous flutter. Through the peephole, she saw a man in a severe, dark grey suit. He was tall, with a ramrod-straight posture and a discreet earpiece. He looked as out of place in her dingy hallway as a hawk in a sparrow's nest. Cautiously, she undid the chain and opened the door a few inches. "Can I help you?" The man's expression was one of polite, professional neutrality. "Clara Mayhew?" he asked, his voice crisp. "Yes?" "My name is Arthur Graves. I have a delivery for you, from my employer." "Your employer?" Clara asked, confused. "I haven't ordered anything." Mr. Graves did not elaborate. Instead, he held out a heavy, matte black box, about the size of a small briefcase. It bore no markings, no logos, no return address. It radiated an aura of immense expense and absolute discretion. "My instructions were to place this directly into your hands," he stated, his gaze unwavering. Hesitantly, Clara took the box. It was surprisingly heavy, cool and smooth to the touch. Who is this from?" she asked again. "My instructions are now complete," Mr. Graves said, with a slight, formal inclination of his head. He turned and walked away, his polished shoes making no sound on the worn linoleum. He didn't wait for a reply. He simply vanished down the stairwell. Clara stood in her doorway, clutching the mysterious box, her mind racing. Was this some bizarre, cruel prank from Seraphina? A box of ashes? A threat? She carried it inside, locking and chaining the door behind her, and set it on her cluttered coffee table. For a full minute, she simply stared at it, her heart pounding. Finally, her curiosity eclipsed her fear. She lifted the heavy lid. Inside, nestled in custom-cut black foam, were 3 items. The first was a brand-new, encrypted satellite phone, sleek and imposing. The second was a single, thick sheet of cream-colored cardstock. The third item made her gasp. It was a card, forged from what looked like solid metal. Matte platinum, heavy and cool in her hand. In the bottom corner was the unmistakable logo of a centurion, and in the center, embossed in clean, minimalist lettering, was her name, Clara Mayhew. It was an American Express Centurion card, the mythical black card, though this one was a more exclusive platinum variant she had never even heard of. It was an invitation-only symbol of unimaginable wealth, a legend whispered about among service staff who might see one once in a lifetime. And it had her name on it. This had to be a mistake, an impossible, elaborate joke. She picked it up. The weight was real. She ran her thumb over the embossed letters of her name. Her hands trembling, Clara picked up the folded note. It was typed in a simple, classic font. Ms. Mayhew. The 0 on the tip line was for the benefit of the actress I was dining with, a necessary part of the performance. Well played. In one brief, impossibly courageous act, you confirmed a suspicion I have been nursing for months, a doubt I was unwilling to confront on my own. You have an extraordinary eye for forgery. It seems my fiancé is one of them. You were dismissed from your position because of me. I will not allow an act of integrity to be the cause of your ruin. This card is in your name. It has no preset spending limit. Use it to settle any and all debts that burden you. Use it to secure your grandfather's future. Consider your financial anxieties to be permanently resolved. But this is not a reward. It is a retainer. I have a much larger problem than an unfaithful fiancé. I am in the process of being robbed, not merely of money, but of my legacy. You have proven yourself to be observant, discreet, and possessed of a courage I have rarely encountered. These are qualities for which I now have a desperate and immediate need. I am offering you a position. Your first task is to arm yourself. Understand the world that people like Serafina inhabit. Buy new clothes. Not just clothes, but armor. Go to the Copley Plaza for lunch. Visit the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. Walk down Newbury Street, not as a spectator, but as a participant. The phone is our sole means of communication. Await my instructions. Do not attempt to contact me. Discretion is not just requested. It is the cornerstone of this arrangement. Welcome to the other side of the table. AF. Clara sank onto her frayed sofa, the note fluttering from her hand. She read it again, and then a third time. Her mind struggled to grasp the sheer, seismic shift that had just occurred. No preset spending limit, a retainer. Welcome to the other side of the table. Alistair Finch. The note hadn't been a joke. It had been a test. He had seen her. He had listened. He had believed her. And this was the consequence. Her first reaction was pure, dizzying disbelief, swiftly followed by a tidal wave of terror. This was the plot of a thriller, not the life of a history student from Alston. What did he need her for? She picked up the platinum card again. Clara Mayhew. Could it possibly be real? With a sudden, desperate need for proof, she snatched her laptop from the table. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she navigated to the online portal for her grandfather's long-term care facility. The outstanding balance stared back at her, a number that haunted her sleep. 28,150. Her hands shook so violently she could barely type. She entered her name. Then, taking a deep breath, she entered the 16 digits from the heavy platinum card. She entered the security code, the expiration date. She hovered her mouse over the Submit Payment button. This was the moment. The fantasy would either solidify into reality or shatter into a million pieces of cruel mockery. She clicked. The processing icon spun for a lifetime. She braced for the inevitable "card declined" message. Instead, the screen refreshed. A green banner appeared at the top of the page. Payment accepted. Thank you. Your current balance is 0.00. Clara stared at the screen, her eyes wide. A sound escaped her, a choked, ragged sob that was equal parts shock and ecstatic relief. It was real. The debt, the crushing, suffocating weight that had dictated every choice she made for the last 3 years, was gone, erased in a single click. She looked at the pile of bills on her desk. The silence in the room was a living thing, expanding to fill the space once occupied by the crushing weight of debt. Clara sat on the edge of her frayed sofa, her laptop warm on her knees, staring at the procession of green banners and $0 balances. Payment accepted. Payment successful. balance, warutultuozozera. They were the 3 most beautiful sentences she had ever read. She had expected a tidal wave of elation, a geyser of triumphant joy. Instead, a profound and unnerving quiet descended upon her soul. For years, every waking moment, every decision, from the brand of coffee she bought to the hours she worked, had been dictated by those numbers. They were the bars of her cage, the gravity that held her to the earth. And now, in the space of 300 seconds, they were gone. She felt strangely untethered, like an astronaut whose tether has been cut, floating in a vast, silent, and terrifying freedom. She ran a hand over her face, the gesture familiar, but the skin beneath felt alien. Who was she without the worry? Who was Clara Mayhew when she wasn't defined by her struggle? A sob, sharp and ragged, finally broke from her, but it was not a sound of pure relief. It was a sound of mourning for the girl who had fought so hard, the girl whose identity had been forged in the crucible of lack. That girl had died just now, slain by a 16-digit number on a piece of platinum. Her gaze fell upon the objects on her coffee table, the sleek, menacing phone, and the heavy card that felt like a talisman from another world. A retainer, the note had said. This wasn't a gift, it was a transaction. He had purchased her freedom, and in return, he had purchased her loyalty, her unique skills, her courage. She thought of her grandfather, not as he was now, adrift in the gentle fog of his later years, but as he was after his ruin. The shame had hollowed him out, leaving a man who apologized for taking up space. Paying his nursing home bill in full wasn't just about money. It was about restoring a fraction of the dignity that had been stolen from him. It was an act of rebellion against the Seraphinas of the world, and Alistair Finch, in his grief and isolation, was offering her the chance to wage a war. She picked up the encrypted phone. It felt cold and dense, a weapon. The single black icon with the silver F seemed to pulse with latent energy. She touched it, and the message from AF appeared, a summons from a king in his castle. The words, observe, acclimatize, belong, were a strategic brief. The final line, a car is waiting for you downstairs, was not a suggestion. It was a statement of fact, an assertion of a new reality that had already been set in motion without her consent. A tremor of fear, sharp and electric, ran through her. It was immediately followed by a surge of something else, something fierce and unfamiliar. Power. The fear was for the girl she had been. The power belonged to the woman she was about to become. She looked down at her faded jeans, the threadbare cuff of her university sweatshirt. This was the uniform of invisibility, of the service class. It was a skin she had to shed. The note had been explicit. Arm yourself. Stepping out of her building was a transfiguration. The drizzly grey Alston morning she had woken up to seemed to have been replaced by a world of crisp focus and vibrant colour. The black Audi A8L was an obsidian monolith parked against the gritty backdrop of her street. It didn't just occupy the space, it dominated it. The driver, a man whose face was a study in impassive professionalism, opened the rear door. The interior was a cocoon of buttery leather and polished burr walnut, smelling of wealth so profound it was utterly silent. Neiman Marcus, Copley Place, she said, and the words felt strange in her own mouth, like an actress reciting a line for the first time. The driver simply inclined his head, and the car pulled away from the curb with the silent, inexorable glide of a predator. As they moved through the city, Clara watched her reflection in the tinted window. It was her face, but the context had changed everything. She was no longer just a passenger in the city's flow. She was an agent moving through it with purpose, insulated from the world by layers of steel, glass, and someone else's immense power. At the department store, a realm of hushed reverence for commerce, she was met by a personal shopper named Diane. Diane was a woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed, with a smile that was both welcoming and instantly analytical. Her eyes did a swift, professional sweep of Clara's attire, her worn sneakers, her frayed tote bag, and her expression settled into one of polite, slightly strained patience. She was preparing to handle a tourist, a dreamer with more time than money. "How may I help you today, miss?" Diane asked, her voice smooth as silk. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the first test. She reached into her tote bag, her fingers closing around the cool, heavy platinum card. She pulled it out and placed it on the polished glass counter between them. She said nothing. The change in Diane was instantaneous and breathtaking. The professional smile didn't vanish, but it transformed. The patience was replaced by an electric, focused attention. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly as she registered the card, not just its type, but its impossible weight and stark design. It was a key, and Clara had just used it to unlock a door Diane reserved for a very select few. The polite miss was gone forever. "Of course, Miss Mayhew," Diane said, her voice now a conspiratorial murmur. "I believe we have a private suite available. What are we looking for today? Or perhaps a better question is, who are we becoming today?" For the next 2 hours, Diane became her quartermaster, her couturier, her guide to the semiotics of power. It wasn't about fashion, it was about communication. "This dress," Diane explained, holding up a navy sheath of severe, elegant simplicity, "doesn't ask for attention. It presumes it. It says you have nothing to prove." The low-heeled Italian leather pumps were not about comfort, but about readiness and mobility. The structured handbag was a statement of organization and intent. It was armor, as Finch had said, but it was also a language. Clara, the student of historical documents, understood. She was learning to forge a new identity, and these were the watermarks, the signature, the official seal. As Diane processed the final sale, the total a number that would have been a life-altering crisis for Clara just that morning, she didn't even flinch. She simply signed the slip, her new signature, firmer, more confident, a testament to the woman taking shape. When Clara walked out onto the street, she was a different person. The world met her differently. Doormen nodded. Eyes lingered, not with pity or dismissal, but with curiosity and a flicker of deference. She was no longer a ghost haunting the edges of this world. She was now one of its citizens. The gallery on Newbury Street was an oasis of calculated serenity. The air was cool and still, the white walls amplifying the silence between the quiet murmurs of the patrons. And there they were. In the center of the main room, bathed in the soft glow of a track light, stood Seraphina Croft and the man who could only be M. He was handsome in a way that set Clara's teeth on edge, a sharp, predatory beauty. They were standing before a vast, turbulent canvas, their heads inclined toward each other, a tableau of intimate conspiracy. They looked less like cousins and more like wolves admiring a map of the sheepfold. Clara's training as a waitress, her hard-won skill of self-effacement, took over. She became a phantom. She accepted a flute of champagne, her movements fluid and unremarkable, and drifted toward a smaller sculpture near the window. Her back to them, she used the plate glass as a mirror, a trick of the trade for keeping an eye on a demanding table. The historian in her took over, analyzing, documenting. The outburst from that little waitress was a gift. Seraphina's voice was a low, venomous purr that carried in the pristine acoustics. Alistair was so horrified, so desperate to prove he hadn't made me uncomfortable, that he's fast-tracking everything. He sees the initial transfer as a grand gesture of his unwavering trust. The man, Julian, chuckled. It was a cold, dry sound. Guilt is the most potent leverage. 10 million in the Zurich account by Friday. That gives us the liquidity to begin the second phase. He wants to acquire the Degas, Serafina added, a greedy shimmer in her tone. The dancer taking a bow, as the Foundation's first official act. For Eleanor, of course. She practically spat the name. Perfect, Julian murmured, his eyes scanning the room, cold and appraising. He's buying us our own legend, a high-profile, legitimate acquisition to cement the Foundation's reputation in the art world. By the time they realize the Foundation is just a shell company for asset liquidation, we'll be ghosts, and the Degas will be on a freighter to a private buyer in Macau. Clara felt a cold knot of fury tighten in her gut. They were not just stealing money, they were desecrating a memory, turning a man's love and grief into a tool for their own enrichment. They were parasites of the soul. The mention of the Degas, Eleanor's favorite, was the final, profane twist of the knife. She had to move, not with anger, but with precision. Belong. She turned from the window, her expression one of mild, cultured interest. She allowed her gaze to sweep the room, letting it pass over Serafina and Julian without a flicker of recognition, as if they were nothing more than part of the decor. Then she walked directly toward the gallery director. "This one," Clara said, her voice calm and clear as she gestured to the bronze sculpture she had been feigning interest in. "I'll take it." The director, a man with a meticulously trimmed goatee, raised an eyebrow. The price placard read 45,000. "An exquisite choice, madam, if you'll follow me." Her path to his small desk at the back of the gallery was a deliberate trajectory. It took her within 5 feet of them. She could feel their eyes on her, the new dress, the bag, the air of quiet purpose. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Julian's head turn, his hunter's gaze assessing a new variable. From her new handbag, she produced the Platinum Centurion card. She didn't hand it to the director. She placed it on the polished mahogany desk with a soft but distinct thud. The sound, in the gallery's hushed atmosphere, was as loud as a gunshot. It was a declaration. Julian's focus sharpened. Serafina, who had glanced over with idle curiosity, froze. Her eyes narrowed, tracing from the impossible card to Clara's face. For a heart-stopping second, there was nothing. And then, Clara saw it. A flicker of confusion, a microscopic furrow of the brow, followed by a dawning, sickening wave of recognition. The blood drained from Serafina's face, leaving behind a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. The waitress, the little nobody from the Ethelred. Here, dressed in Chanel and armed with the Centurion. It was an impossibility, a tear in the fabric of her carefully constructed reality. Clara met her gaze for a single, charged second. She offered no smile, no threat, no sign of recognition at all. She simply held her gaze with the cool, indifferent appraisal one might give a piece of furniture. It was the most profound dismissal she could have delivered. She was not the same person. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been inverted with tectonic force. "We will have this delivered to any address you wish, Miss Mayhew," the director cooed, his deference absolute. "Thank you," Clara said, her voice even. "That will be all." She turned and walked out of the gallery, not looking back, feeling Serafina's horrified gaze on her like a physical touch. Back in the silent, leather-scented sanctuary of the Audi, her composure shattered. A violent tremor ran through her hands. She had done more than observe. She had engaged. She had walked into the heart of their operation, not as a spy, but as a rival power, an unknown and terrifying player in their game. She pulled out the phone, her thumbs flying across the glass screen, summarizing the intel with the cold precision of a field agent. The reply from AF was almost instantaneous. AF, excellent. The audacity of the move with the sculpture was inspired. You have rattled them. They will make a mistake. Serafina Croft is an alias. We need her real name. The reference to Geneva you overheard is the only thread we have that predates her arrival in Boston. Your historian's skills are for finding the truth buried in the past. I need you to find hers. AF. I am authorizing the creation of a discretionary operational fund under your sole control. A corporate account at Sterling Private Bank has been opened in your name. The initial deposit is $20 million. Hire anyone you need, private investigators, forensic accountants, digital researchers. Build your team. I do not care what it costs. Find out who she is, where she came from, and who she has left in her wake. The car and driver are yours. All my resources are now your resources. Find the ghost. Clara stared at the screen. The number, $20 million. So absurd it seemed like a typo. Build your team. Run an intelligence operation. A year ago, her biggest operational challenge was coordinating appetizer and entree timings for a table of 6. But the fear was gone now, burned away by the cold fire of purpose. She thought of her grandfather's trembling hands, of the love in Alistair's eyes when he spoke of Eleanor. She was not just an instrument of his will. She was an avenger for them all. He had not just given her resources. He had given her a sword and pointed her at the dragon. The hunt for Serafina Croft became Clara's entire world. She started not in a library, but in a sterile, glass-walled office she leased in the financial district. She was no longer a student. She was the director of a bespoke intelligence firm of her own creation. Her first hire was a grizzled, semi-retired private investigator from South Boston named O'Malley. A man with more sources than a river has tributaries. Her second was a young, ravenously brilliant digital forensics expert from MIT who could peel back layers of the dark web like an onion. Her third was a forensic accountant, a woman so meticulous she could find a fraudulent penny in the Vatican's budget. They were her team, and she directed them with the same methodical rigor she had once applied to authenticating 18th-century manuscripts. The clue was Geneva. While her team dug into financial records and digital ghosts, Clara delved into the social archives. She searched for similar cons, high-value art world frauds, cases of romantic deception targeting wealthy, grieving widowers. The work was obsessive, all-consuming. She was hunting for a pattern, a signature, a forger's tell. 2 weeks later, the break came. The forensic accountant found it, a complex series of shell corporations funneling money through Geneva, linked to a major art fraud case in Monaco 5 years prior. A wealthy industrialist, recently widowed, had been swindled out of his collection by a beautiful, mysterious art consultant and her charming brother. The consultant's name was not Serafina Croft, it was Katerina Varga, and her brother was named Julian Varga. Interpol had a file on them, but they were phantoms, always one step ahead. Clara had her name. The ghost now had a past. From there, the edifice of lies crumbled. O'Malley's sources in Europe found the Vargas' trail, a string of broken hearts and emptied bank accounts from Paris to Prague. They were predators who specialized in the particular vulnerability of grief. Clara compiled the dossier. It was a masterpiece of a different sort, a meticulous, undeniable and damning portrait of a lifetime of deception. It contained financial records, witness statements from past victims, Interpol warrants, and the real identities of 2 professional criminals. She sent a single, encrypted message to Finch. "Clara, I have them. It's time to end the performance." The final act took place not in a courtroom, but back where it all began. The Ethelred. Alistair, on Clara's advice, had arranged a celebratory dinner. Serafina and Julian, though rattled by Clara's appearance at the gallery, believed their plan was still on track. The $10 million transfer was scheduled for the next day. They arrived at the restaurant, triumphant and eager for the final kill. They were shown to table 12. And waiting there, sitting opposite Alistair Finch, was Clara Mayhew. She was wearing a simple black dress, the picture of quiet confidence. Serafina stopped dead, her face a mask of fury and confusion. "What is she doing here?" she hissed at Alistair. Alistair looked at her, and for the first time, all the warmth, all the lonely hope was gone from his eyes. They were as cold and hard as granite. "Clara is my new head of asset protection," he said, his voice flat. "She was just presenting me with her first report. It's about you, Katerina." The use of her real name struck Serafina like a physical blow. Julian took a step back, his hand instinctively going to his jacket pocket. "Don't bother," a new voice said. 2 immaculately dressed men, who looked like diners at a nearby table, rose and flanked Julian. They were not waiters. "Federal agents," one of them said calmly. "You and your sister are wanted in connection with wire fraud, conspiracy, and multiple outstanding warrants from Interpol." The blood drained from Julian's face. Serafina stared at Clara, her beautiful features contorted into a mask of pure hatred. "You," she whispered, "the little waitress." Clara looked back at her, not with triumph, but with a kind of weary finality. "Every forger makes a mistake," she said softly. "You got the details right. The performance was flawless. But you underestimated the audience." A week later, Clara sat at table 12 again. This time, the restaurant was empty, closed for a private event. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Across from her, Alistair Finch swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "They're gone," he said. "Extradited this morning. The Swiss authorities have frozen the accounts. The Foundation's money is secure." He looked at Clara, his eyes holding a profound, quiet gratitude. "I built an empire of logic, of machines and predictable systems. I never thought my greatest vulnerability would be my own heart. You saved more than my money, Clara. You saved me from the wreckage of my own foolishness." "You weren't foolish," Clara said. "You were grieving. They prey on that. It's what they do." "And you," he said, leaning forward. "You are not a waitress. You're not a history student. What you did, it was the work of a master strategist. The position is real if you want it. Head of the Finch Foundation. Not just protecting its assets, but running it. Building the legacy Eleanor and I dreamed of. Using your intellect not to catch criminals, but to find and nurture true talent, to protect real art." Clara looked out the window at the bustling Boston street. The world looked the same, but her place in it had been fundamentally remade. The money, the power, the clothes, they were tools. But the real change was inside. The quiet desperation had been replaced by a quiet strength. The fear had been replaced by a resolute sense of purpose. The girl who walked into this restaurant 2 months ago would have said yes without a second thought, she said, her voice thoughtful. She would have been grateful for the security, for the chance. Alistair's expression tensed slightly. And now? Clara turned back to him, and a small, genuine smile touched her lips for the first time. Now, she said, I know my own value. I accept the position, not as a gift, but as a partner. He returned her smile, a real one, tinged with relief and deep respect. To partnership, then, he said, raising his glass. Clara raised her water glass to meet his. The ghosts of the past had been exorcised. The con was over. The debt was paid. She was no longer a character in someone else's story. For the first time, holding the cool glass in her steady hand, surrounded by the quiet elegance of a world she had once only served, Clara Mayhew felt like the author of her own.